How many people pack a bag and leave home without truly knowing why they are going? How many people really understand the meaning of travel? And how many people only discover the value of life after they have already stepped onto the road? Sometimes the answer does not come before departure. Sometimes it only appears after the journey begins. Anne Lockwood has spent years placing her energy around her husband, Michael. Their child is grown and has a life of her own, so Anne's attention has shifted almost completely to Michael's career, his schedule, his clothes, his meals, and his needs. Michael is a successful film producer and a serious workaholic. In his mind, nothing matters more than business. He does not seem to notice Anne's feelings, and Anne often feels less like his wife and more like his personal assistant. She has wanted a chance to repair their marriage for a long time, so she suggests a spontaneous trip. At first, Michael refuses because of work, but after Anne keeps asking, he finally agrees. Unfortunately, the trip begins with disappointment. They arrive in Cannes, and Anne only wants a romantic breakfast by the sea. Michael looks at the food, the location, and the atmosphere, then immediately starts analyzing the place in terms of business value. Every sentence circles back to work. Anne is annoyed, but she still keeps a smile on her face. After only one night at the seaside hotel, Michael receives a call. A work issue has come up, and he has to go to Budapest. He tells Anne he will handle the business first, then meet her in Paris for a proper vacation. Anne has no choice but to accept it. As they prepare to leave, Michael walks away and lets Anne deal with the luggage. She is used to this by now. In Michael's priorities, business always comes before her. Before heading to the airport, they meet Michael's French business partner, Jacques Clément. Since they are in France, Jacques insists on playing host and offers to drive them to the airport. On the way, Anne's ear begins to hurt badly. She only complains once, but Michael barely reacts. Jacques, however, notices. When he stops to buy local specialties, he also brings back medicine for her ear infection. Anne is touched by the small gesture. Michael sees it too, but instead of feeling guilty for neglecting her, he becomes a little jealous. He quickly changes the subject and starts talking business with Jacques again. Anne loses interest and turns to the window, watching the scenery pass by. At the airport, the crew hears about Anne's ear pain and advises her not to fly. The cabin pressure could make the pain worse. Anne decides to skip Budapest and take the train to Paris alone, where she can wait for Michael. Michael agrees almost too easily. Jacques says he also has an important meeting in Paris, so he can drive Anne there himself. That way, she can enjoy the French countryside along the road. The idea attracts Anne immediately. A quiet drive through France sounds far better than another rushed work trip. Michael is not thrilled, but he is in a hurry, so he agrees. By the time everything is settled, it is already noon. Before Anne can even think about lunch, Jacques has already booked a restaurant. It is one of his favorite places, away from the crowded beach, the kind of restaurant where people can sit for half an afternoon. The waiter brings a bottle of red wine that Jacques ordered in advance. It is smooth, fragrant, and exactly to Anne's taste. Then comes ham with melon, paired beautifully with the wine. Anne takes one bite and understands why Jacques takes food so seriously. Only after lunch do they finally set off for Paris. Not long after, they pass Mont Saint-Victoire, a famous local landmark and a source of inspiration for many writers and artists. Jacques mentions Cézanne, whose paintings captured the mountain again and again. Anne also loves Cézanne's work because it always seems to reveal something unexpected. Jacques likes smoking while he drives, which reminds Anne of her father. Her father smoked 2 packs a day and died when he was only 56. Jacques quickly changes the subject. Nearby, there is an ancient Roman site, and Anne wants to see it. Jacques pulls over without hesitation. The ruins are thousands of years old. Every stone seems to carry the weight of time. Anne and Jacques walk through the site, take photos, and browse the local stalls. The stop was not part of the plan, but that is exactly what makes it feel alive. Back in the car, Jacques plays music by Erik Satie and tells Anne stories about the composer. Satie was strange, never married, and supposedly hated washing shirts so much that he simply threw them away when they got dirty. They keep driving, talking, and watching the countryside. That night, they stop at a hotel. Jacques has already arranged dinner and tells Anne to come down in half an hour. Before dinner, Anne receives a call from Michael. He does not ask whether she is tired or how the trip is going. Instead, he warns her not to cross any boundaries with Jacques. Anne is angry and hangs up. At dinner, Jacques has chosen a restaurant known for its roasted lamb. Over the meal, he learns that Anne has been thinking about starting a business. She has been taking photos along the way, partly as preparation, but she has also fallen in love with photography itself. Once she starts shooting, she cannot stop. Anne notices the roses on the table and says she loves roses. These seem more fragrant than the ones back home, which often smell like they have been stored in a refrigerator. Jacques knows the story behind every dish and ingredient. Anne is impressed by how naturally he turns food into memory, history, and pleasure. He later reveals that he was once a chef and even opened a restaurant with his girlfriend, but their relationship ended and the restaurant closed too. Anne eats so much that she cannot finish dessert. She encourages Jacques to eat the chocolate, joking that chocolate is good for smokers. Jacques laughs and says Americans always need reasons for everything. The French simply eat what they want because they want it. Then the conversation shifts to Michael. Jacques says Michael called him many times upstairs and talked in circles. He could tell Michael was afraid something might happen between them. Jacques does not understand why Michael distrusts them, especially when Michael himself has not been faithful. Anne becomes uneasy. She suspects what Jacques is implying, but she cannot bear to hear the details. Before Jacques can say more about Michael and other women, Anne gets up and leaves. By the next morning, thanks to Jacques' medicine, her ear is much better. Jacques is already waiting downstairs. After breakfast, they continue the journey. They visit an ancient Roman arena, another landmark full of history. Now it belongs more to birds than to people, but the structure still carries the power of the past. At a gas station, Jacques fills the car while Anne goes into the shop for snacks. When she comes out, Jacques and the car are gone. For a moment, she panics. She sits and waits quietly until Jacques finally returns. In the back seat is a pot of roses. Anne is surprised and deeply moved. She mentioned roses only once, and Jacques remembered. To him, a proper journey needs beauty, a woman, and the scent of flowers. As they continue, Anne wants to see the scenery along the Rhone. They cross a bridge and imagine how lovely it would be to have a riverside barbecue. Then the car breaks down. Smoke rises from the engine, and it will not start. Their fancy food plans disappear. Lunch becomes bread and wine by the river. Anne feels frustrated, but Jacques remains completely at ease. He tells her there is food everywhere if people know how to see it. He picks wild greens and combines them with bread, turning a breakdown into a small picnic. Anne slowly relaxes. After eating, she almost forgets the car has broken down at all. They talk for more than an hour before remembering the problem. Jacques calmly smokes a cigarette, checks the engine, and realizes it is a cooling issue. The car can still run for a while, so he drives to the nearest repair shop. The mechanic says the car has multiple problems and will take days to fix. Jacques and Anne borrow the mechanic's old car and continue. Jacques complains that the car does not even have a stereo and may not make it to Paris. This time, Anne comforts him. The car has airbags, and her phone has music. That is enough. They pass through small towns and eventually arrive in Lyon, the center of France, and not far from Paris. In Lyon, Jacques takes Anne to a famous museum. The museum's director, Marie, is an old friend of his. While Jacques and Marie catch up, Marie arranges a guide for Anne. Anne sees early film equipment, including one of the first projectors, and is amazed by the intelligence and imagination behind it. The guide explains that the Lumiere brothers once thought their invention had no real future. Obviously, they were wrong. After the tour, Marie joins Jacques and Anne for a meal. She brings them to a local market known for ham, cheese, and regional specialties. At the table, Marie remembers eating wild beans with bitter greens in Palermo. When snails are served, Marie and Jacques begin discussing exactly how they should be prepared: alive, salted, cleaned, and cooked properly. The explanation destroys Anne's appetite. She quietly slips the snails into the trash. Chicken is much more to her taste, and she eats plenty of it. She also notices Marie's shawl, a beautiful paisley pattern from the early 19th century. When Marie sees Anne's interest in textiles, she takes her to a fabric museum. Anne is especially drawn to an 18th century piece and is surprised to learn it was made by a man. When they leave Lyon, Marie tells Anne she will never forget this journey with Jacques. As the sun goes down, down, Anne falls asleep in the car. When she wakes, they are near the road between Paris and Vézelay. Jacques turns toward Vézelay without hesitation. He wants to take her to one last place. The church in Vézelay is ancient and spiritually significant. Jacques explains that one of the Crusades began there, and tradition says the remains of Mary Magdalene are buried beneath the altar. Inside, every carved column tells a story. When Anne sees a statue of the Virgin Mary holding the child, she stops. Tears fill her eyes. Jacques gently asks her to tell him what hurts. After hesitating, Anne opens up. Inside the locket she wears around her neck is a photo of her first child from her first marriage. The baby lived only a little over a month. After the child died, Anne and her first husband were destroyed by grief. One day, Anne walked into a church and saw a statue of Mary holding the child. In that moment, she felt connected to all the mothers who had lost children. That connection gave her enough courage to keep living. But her first husband could not survive the grief. He died by suicide. Anne has carried that pain silently for years. Jacques comforts her. He tells her she is human and that she has reached a certain depth through suffering. But she cannot remain trapped inside one loss forever. She has to make peace with herself. That night, there is another meal. When a tiny dish of artfully prepared tomatoes appears, Jacques says people make food too complicated. As a child, his mother used to pick tomatoes from the garden in September. When they were big and red, she would slice them onto bread, add olive oil and pepper, and tell him that was the best food in the world. Back then, Jacques did not understand. Now he does. The best food often comes straight from the garden, pure and honest, without unnecessary decoration. Anne grew up in Cleveland and once thought fried chicken represented good food. Only after moving to California did she discover how wide the world of food could be. Jacques looks through Anne's photographs and tells her she has a real eye. Her pictures show only part of the scene, but they make a person imagine the whole thing. He encourages her to print them. Then he asks what Michael thinks of her photography. Anne becomes quiet. Michael has never paid much attention to her work or her interests. For a long time, they have felt more like colleagues than husband and wife. Jacques asks why she does not tell Michael how she feels. Anne has no answer. Maybe some things do not need to be said because she already knows how they will end. Anne is also curious about Jacques. A man who loves freedom so much seems like the last person who would stay in the world of finance and business. Jacques explains that he has no children, only a nephew. When his older brother died, the boy was only 2. The family told him it was an accident, but Jacques knows the truth. His brother died by suicide. He never told his nephew because he did not want that burden to damage the boy's heart. So Jacques treated the nephew like a son and did everything he could to give him a good life. That, to him, is a form of happiness. Then Jacques asks Anne what the happiest moment of her life was. Anne smiles and says it was when her daughter was born, and the doctor told her the baby was healthy. At last, the car enters Paris. Anne feels unexpectedly sad. She does not know whether she is mourning the end of the journey or the end of her time with Jacques. At the apartment she rented, Anne says goodbye. She cannot fully explain what the trip has meant to her, so she simply tells Jacques that it mattered. Inside the empty apartment, she thinks about her life at home. She has spent so long orbiting Michael that she barely has her own space anymore. She has lost freedom, and with it, a piece of herself. Maybe it is time to think seriously about what she wants her life to become. Then the doorbell rings. Jacques has brought up the roses from the car. Surrounded by the fragrance of flowers, Anne and Jacques finally give in and kiss. But before the moment goes too far, Anne stops him and asks him to leave. There are things she needs to think through. Michael may have betrayed the marriage first, but Anne does not want to respond in a way that leaves her feeling ashamed. She and Jacques need the right time and a clearer understanding of what this connection really is. Even so, Anne has already made a quiet decision in her heart. She looks forward to the next journey with Jacques, even if it begins as friendship. An unplanned trip, an unexpected encounter, a memory that cannot be erased, a heart slowly learning how to breathe again. Through Jacques, Anne changes during the journey. Her old, fast-paced life slows down. She begins to notice the scenery around her, taste the food in front of her, and listen to herself again. When they say goodbye, they both feel the pull between them, but they also stop before crossing a line they are not ready to cross. The affection remains, held quietly in the heart. Jacques' way of life may look casual, even reckless, but underneath it is loyalty to the present moment. He drives an old car, eats what he loves, enjoys beauty without apology, and does not over-explain pleasure. Life is sometimes like that. Not everything needs to carry a heavy meaning. Constantly searching for meaning can make a person tired, and it can make life feel dull. Sometimes the better answer is simply to notice what is in front of you: the road, the meal, the flowers, the conversation, and the self you almost forgot. That's all for today's movie recap. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like, comment, and share. I'll see you in the next one.